Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. My name is Spencer Walls. Thank you so much for joining us here today. It is time for a rare late night episode. This is your Wednesday episode to set you up for Thursday. We've got a great show for you today. We kind of missed the contours of the deal, came into an actual deal over the weekend while we were away. We're going to break down some of the key points of that, some of the things that I took away from for sure. My kind of overall thoughts on that. We'll take a special look at the climate provisions and how the bill is moving through Congress, especially from the political aspects of it, because they're pretty darn juicy. Meanwhile, Russia has denounced the West over a drone strike on Moscow, pretty much saying that it really was Ukraine's allies to condemn the strike and arguing that the real war was with the West because, honestly, guess who's funding them? And, when they mean the West, they mean the United States. Meanwhile, Henry Kissinger is remembered by the wonderful Jon Schwarz. And I say remembered, well, the thing is, he is still alive. He just celebrated his 100th birthday. We'll take with some of the biggest crimes that man has committed. It is our, I counting as the Wednesday show here today because when I woke up, it was Wednesday, but, it is technically a Thursday show. Welcome. Thank you so much for listening. My pleasure to have you here. For these next 30 minutes or so, welcome to Newsflash. So we got a very interesting and pretty important deal to talk about. It was kind of struck between Joe Biden and Kevin McCarthy. Coming to this, it was a pretty dire situation for Joe Biden. As you could tell by some of the titles I was making, I was pretty nervous. I was expecting, frankly, it could have been a lot worse for the Democrats. They could have given away a lot more. They could have cut a lot more, especially if you look at, as a kind of a starting point, kind of a worst case scenario, the Kevin McCarthy budget that was passed back in April, which we broke down as well, was some pretty deep cuts to these social programs. It turned out, that this really was a deal. I think when you kind of can come down to it, there's some to like, there's also plenty not to like. When it comes down to it, from both sides, both kind of flanks of this are pretty pissed off because it's establishment compromise. It's, saying, oh, here's what we can do. We can just cut spending, freeze all spending on these kind of programs, give a little kind of stop to the Tea Party, and no Democrat or no Republican voted for that. As you can clearly tell, we're going to get to, has no problem putting forward a budget that really, frankly, does take away resources from the people who need it the most, while not doing anything to, take some of the resources from the people who have all the resources and maybe spread some of that wealth a little bit downwards, which is something that, even Joe Biden was trying to get Kevin McCarthy into doing, kind of maybe knowing that he would never really bite for that. But, that's a whole other story. And that's really why I have to say with the people who are, the Bernie Sanders of the world, I believe AOC as well, voting no. We'll get to all kind of the breakdown of that in a minute. But it really does kind of show, let's go through some of the highlights here. You got just general defense discretionary spending freeze, which is a pretty big deal because when there could have been actual cuts. So the money, the increases they said they were going to increase, they're just going to not increase on. So it's going to take away, a lot of expected money from programs. Quality of programs are going to get worse. But again, classic with the Democrats. How many times, again, do we keep coming back this same story over and over again? Could have been worse, could have been worse, could have been worse. And that is what we have here with the Democrats passing this, or coming forward with this deal, negotiating this deal with Kevin McCarthy. This was probably a deal that was encouraged in no small part by Wall Street, by panic from Wall Street, kind of about the direction of the economy. I think that's definitely something you got to take into some pretty strong consideration here about why this deal was able to happen and why so many people in the Freedom Caucus who just frankly expect the world from Kevin McCarthy, expected him kind of never fold and trying to get the Democrats to pass a bill that would completely gut like SNAP and temporary assistance for needy families and things like that. That really was something that was not going to be too long for this world. And when it came down to it, end of the day, it really, it really was pretty surprising and good for Joe Biden, considering, again, this is something you have to understand if you're going to look at this situation and any way rationally. He put himself here in the first place by, kind of refusing to negotiate, but also saying, I don't even know what. I have no idea what he was thinking. Do you think they would just give up and stop and say, we care too much about the economy and we want to do the right thing? No. If you're not going to negotiate, try something else to do instead in the meantime. I don't know what he thought was going to happen here, but it's just absolutely ridiculous. It really, really, really is. There's also the whole thing about work requirements where they're taking 50 to 54-year-olds, childless people off of the ability to get some, I believe, like SNAP and TAMF and all that, and the programs of that nature, and to apparently they're netting it out by including homeless people and veterans and making it easier for them to get on. But apparently that seemed very unlikely. The speculation is that net change could still be a negative, not a positive, because the homeless people and veterans will just not know about it, not be able to get signed up, et cetera, which happens so much of the time with American welfare because nobody expects it to work, because America's not really fundamentally a welfare state. It's a welfare state in that it has welfare programs, but it has a welfare state, but it is not a welfare state. It's not a country where people expect the government to work for them. They have to work for the government. They have to work, they have to work for these corporations, and it's just this kind of it's just a completely backwards ideology. But bottom line, when it comes down to this deal, is a pretty tough deal. There's pretty big blows. And we'll get into some of the climate stuff in just a bit. But it is a bill that, by and large, Republicans are not happy with and Democrats are, because, coming into it, they thought they had a lot more leverage than Kevin McCarthy was able to extract from Joe Biden. And they're pretty much saying, you gave our only leverage away for not very much. We'll get into some of what this deal has to say in 30.
MC, make another hit.
This ain't what you want. Project. This ain't what you want. This ain't what you want.
You're listening to Newsflash right here on the Spencer Walsh Radio Network. Help us grow our audience. Subscribe, rate, and review our show on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Thank you very much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, time to get into some of the juicy stuff here. So this is in some drama in the House today, but they passed it. It ended up being all right. They overwhelmingly passed legislation negotiated by President Biden and Speaker Kevin McCarthy to suspend the debt ceiling and set federal spending limits as a broad. This is the grand bargain that good old Mr. Negotiator Joe got, that really in 2011 Barack Obama only dreamed of, because they were about to kind of go into the sequestration period back in 2011 because Obama was like, okay, fine, we'll cut Social Security, but really he just wanted to do a kind of a big bipartisan deal and have everyone kind of be happy with him, but Republicans at the time were just rabid. Not that they're more rabid now, but they were just rabid enough to say, "Oh, this Social Security is not cut enough. Got to cut it by more." And then the deal fell apart. But again, the bill would defer federal debt limit for 2 years, allowing the government to borrow unlimited sums as necessary to pay its obligation, while imposing 2 years of spending caps and a string of policy changes that Republicans demanded in exchange for allowing the country to avoid a disastrous default. So it was a 314 to 117 vote coming days before the nation was set to exhaust its borrowing limit. Excuse me, definitely kind of coming down to the wire there. With both far right and hard left, I love those called the hard left and the far right for some reason. I don't know why. But it fell to a bipartisan coalition. This is the glorification of the New York Times. The far left and the hard right were acting crazy. So they had to call in the establishment, centrist Democrats and Republicans to come in and cut all your welfare programs, cut SNAP, cut TAMP, all that kind of stuff like that. And again, on the final vote, 149 Republicans and 165 Democrats backed the measure, while 71 Republicans and 46 Democrats opposed it. That was a blow to the Republican speaker, who's hard fought. And again, 70 was actually the upper limit that he set for defections that he expected on this bill. So that's going to be kind of politically important for him, as we'll get to. But the measure nearly collapsed on its way to the House floor when hard-right Republicans sought to block its consideration. And in a suspenseful scene, Democrats waited several minutes before swooping in to supply their votes for a procedural measure that allowed the plan to move ahead. So not to make Kevin McCarthy look even worse, but the Democrats just saved the deal that he made from falling apart completely. So the deal would suspend the $31.4 trillion borrowing limit until January 2025. It would cut federal spending by $1.5 trillion over a decade, according to the CBO, effectively freezing some funding, then projected to increase next year, and limiting spending to 1% growth in 2025, which is considered a cut because it would be lower than the level of inflation by a lot. The legislation would also impose stricter work requirements for food stamps, clawbacks, and funding. Again, that is another thing I forgot. It was a big kind of Republican talking point. Biden is sending all this money to the IRS. He's going to use it to knock down your door if you don't pay your taxes right on time. No, he just wants that money so the IRS can actually properly go back after rich people, because when they're poor, they go after the poor because the poor can't fight back nearly as effectively as the rich can. But IRS has proven when they're actually well-funded or relatively well-funded, they can go after the people who are actually stealing money from the government in the form of tax delinquency and not paying their taxes. But that is going to be cut back as they, have clawed some of the funding back from the IRS and unspent coronavirus relief money, speed the permitting of new energy projects, and officially end Biden's student loan repayment freeze. The compromise was structured with the aim of enticing votes from both parties. Specifically, some of the most moderate people, I think it's fair to say, and that is obviously what had happened. The most moderate people on both sides, really kind of a, backroom deal, get everybody in and come to the right decision eventually. Just do it for the good of the country type of deal. McCarthy framed the bill on Wednesday as a small step, putting us on the right track, and urged his members to support it. We're finally bending the curve on discretionary spending because of this bill, and are doing it while at the same time raising our national defense and our veterans fully funded with Social Security and Medicare preserved. He said, "This is a major victory." And again, people in the Freedom Caucus, they don't want any of that stuff. They don't want to bend the curve. They want to break the curve. They want to, early March 2020, they want to flatten that curve when it comes to discretionary spending. They want to, honestly, some of them would probably be completely fine to cut the national defense, but, establishment Republicans are not fine. So hence, it's going to be raised. I don't think anyone on the Republican side would really want to cut veterans, Democrats either. But they're not happy about this. But Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York and the minority leader, described the deal as a pretty vital step, thanking Democrats for their efforts. I don't know how much he was kind of involved in this, but Biden lauded the bill as a passage as a critical step forward to prevent a first-ever default. The budget agreement is a bipartisan compromise. Biden, who called the congressional leaders after the vote, said in a statement, "Neither side got everything it wanted." It's not long after the bill passed the House, Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, moved to speed it to the floor in that chamber, where it was expected to get quick consideration. Schumer warned earlier in the day the senators would need to approve the bill without changes to meet the June 5th deadline, when Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen had said the government would default without action by Congress. The vote on Wednesday was a pretty big victory for McCarthy, at least nominally, because he won, he got across the line with relatively 2/3 of his caucus sticking with him, which is something that he could have, probably the best he could have hoped for, given the large amount of concessions relative to the original bill that were kind of in this deal. If you would expect McCarthy would be able to unite his fractious confidence around any such measure, much less one negotiated with Biden, without prompting an attempt by his right flank to oust him, which really still may come. Representative Dan Bishop, Republican of North Carolina, and a member of the ultra-conservative House Freedom Caucus, said publicly he considered the debt and spending deal grounds for removing McCarthy from his post. Another member of the group, Representative Ken Buck, Republican of Colorado, who is, by the way, a first round McCarthy vote here, said the members would have discussions about whether to try to oust him, saying, quote, "I'm not suggesting the votes are there to remove the speaker, but the speaker promised that we would operate at 2022 appropriations levels when he got the support to become the speaker," said Buck. He's now changed that to 2023 levels plus 1%. That's a major change for a lot of people. And, if that's the hill they want to die on, I think Democrats will probably say, we'll be happy to die on it. So that's definitely something to watch. Dan Bishop, a lot of these other people are very, very unhappy about a lot of this stuff. And if you look at that, they really, there's a good part of it that's kind of being, we are not happy about this, for the base, for the hardcore kind of Tea Partiers out there who don't want to see any kind of compromise with Biden. The media has been telling them, their media has been telling them, you cannot have any kind of compromise. It's going to be complete defeat if you do. And especially if Kevin McCarthy becomes a villain because of it, it'll be a very, very big deal for them down the road. But what is definitely clear is that they, some of them are definitely a strong base of ideological dislike for this bill based on, where they thought they should be versus where they are now. Some of that may be getting a little bit hyped, but it's a very, very big deal. Dan Bishop said on Twitter, "This is what it looks like when the uniparty cartel sells out the American people." So, again, and it's, let's take a little bit of a look. Let's see if we can listen. This is a little Dan Bishop on the clip of Dan Bishop and all the Lauren Boebert I see there in the background. A lot of House Tea Party guys. A guy who I've definitely seen. I know it's pretty hard right, but I don't exactly know his name based on his face. Because at least I'm trying to have some semblance of a normal life. But anyway, here he is talking to people.
You guys don't just have to listen to, because these guys have covered it pretty well. But it's not just that every Republican should vote against this. It's a little bit more than that. This is a career-defining vote for every Republican. All of you guys know that thus far in this Congress, the dynamic force in Washington has been the unified House majority. The fact that we resolved in January on concrete details how we're going to go forward together. And it has been impactful over the first several months of Congress. Imagine the decision of Kevin McCarthy and his negotiators to forfeit that. Imagine that. Why would you give that up? Can you imagine doing it in the middle of a negotiating process without at least putting us all in a room to hash out, or representatives from our several groups among the Republican conference who've gotten together before? Can you calculate the cost of surrendering that advantage? But maybe worse. In Washington, I thought the least present quality was courage. But I'm afraid truth tops that. This bill, as others have given you detail on, is chock full of cosmetic things, yes, artificial things, things that actually have been outright lied about, misstated, like the change to IRS funding. In every supposed get for the Republicans, they are chock full of cosmetics. But the hard and cold reality, and again, there's not a member here who can tell you exactly what the increase in the debt will be. We just know the timing that it has been moved out. People said, actually, Kevin McCarthy said the Democrats didn't get anything in this bill.
Yeah, so Dan Bishop pretty much kind of going on and on, ranting and raving about the fact that he is just not happy at all with this bill. Pretty much, he's, again, big thing kind of take away from there is that, they know what they have. They know they have a lot of leverage to demand a lot because, really essentially they're just willing to take it. They're willing to say, I am willing to grind my foot in the gears of the economy and essentially saying, no more. We don't have to do this. I don't want to do this. And it really is quite crazy. And the fact they're not kind of being appropriately called out for what they're doing, really what they're willing to say is, in the minority, we're going to come in, we're going to put the global economy on the line to do these cuts over work requirements, to stop the debt, whatever way they want to spin on it, and really it's partially the media's fault for not really telling people what is going on, but I also have to say I think it's the Biden administration's fault for they are again totally the most to blame for completely allowing this to happen. And allowing them to take this essentially all the way to the bank and, more or less, I guess you say more or less missed the layup, but I don't know. In a display of their displeasure, 29 conservative Republicans took the unusual step of breaking ranks on a procedural vote to take up the legislation, normally a formality that passes entirely along party lines. As in a pretty dramatic moment on the House floor, the Republican defections piled up, imperiling the deal, and Jeffries finally raised a green voting card in the air, signaling fellow Democrats that it was time to go ahead and bail Republicans out. A stream of centrist and veteran Democrats, 52 in all, crowded into the well and voted yes, rescuing the deal from collapse. In the final vote of the bill, McCarthy was able to muster roughly two-thirds of Republican votes for the plan. Which probably puts him in a pretty good position relative to the House. But anyway, let's move on to our next story. A pretty important part of this bill. At first glance, the bipartisan deal to raise the debt ceiling seems pretty good for the climate. Most importantly, it preserves the IRA's, some of the key parts of the IRA on climate. This is Joe Biden's flagship law. It's a pretty big deal, again, especially given how bad things could have been. But when climate advocates have spoken against the deal, they focus their ire on the Mountain Valley Pipeline, a 304-mile conduit that will link West Virginia's booming natural gas fields to the rest of the country. The deal essentially approves the pipeline and exempts it from judicial oversight, which is all but ensuring its eventual completion. Senator Joe Manchin, West Virginia Democrat, won the White House's support for the pipeline when he agreed to the IRA last year. And again, this is just something that you can, I think, if you're smart politically and you actually care about the environment, I think you can chuck this out the window. If you're looking at Joe Manchin down right now in West Virginia, his election is in 2024. He's down by a good 20 points against the West Virginia governor, who, all I see of him is he's got, I'm sure he's awful, but all I see of him, he's got a dog. He's like, it's my dog, Baby Girl. Take Baby Girl to the Senate. Or something like that. But, he's not, Joe Manchin is literally a just complete shameless coal baron who uses the wheels of government to help coal and coal interests because he owns, and he is a coal interest. He literally is cutting out the middleman here almost completely. So despite the chatter, the pipeline, though, was in fact not the most important climate concession exacted in negotiations. The deal was also made a number of changes to federal permitting law, especially the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. These changes have been described as relatively small, common sense reforms to the federal process. Because, again, this is established media coming out and saying, it's just common sense. Excuse me. That's should be your reaction when politicians are saying they're doing something for common sense. A little bit of skepticism there, to say the least. Because, Democrats have secured many objectives in the debt, or the debt ceiling talks, including minimal cuts to federal programs and a potential expansion of food stamps. But the deal's permitting reforms are an uneven trade in which Democrats gave up more than they gained and made virtually no progress on one of their biggest goals, making it easier to build long-distance power lines. Congress revisits permanent reform in the next few months, as Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy has promised. Democrats will find really they have little room to bargain because we have this NEPA Act kind of sending out here. It requires the federal government to conduct an environmental study before it does much of anything. It also sets the rules by which the government can kind of operate when it comes to all of this stuff, large-scale infrastructure, building, and things like that. If the state wants to build a new highway with federal funds, it must apply to the government, which runs a NEPA process to determine whether to grant funding. Virtually every major government project, whether a new mass transit hub or an offshore wind farm, requires a NEPA study or a NEPA process. Republicans have long wanted to tinker with NEPA, kind of make it a little bit easier for big business and kind of come in and get in there, get the job, kind of get the ball rolling, so to speak. But NEPA was once widely understood to really be, at least by progressives, a pretty big part of environmental law. Fighting climate change will require building a lot of new infrastructure, they have argued, and NEPA could really slow down that process. As this is the argument of some who have been a little bit more open to reforming it, this kind of permitting process, making it easier for people to build green energy, just kickstart the green energy revolution and give the market almost really a chance to, like so many of these kind of, capitalist people have been saying, just give the market a chance, it'll adapt, it'll start to build green energy. And if it's, kind of open up, well, now we're going to have a very interesting kind of test case here. At the same time, virtually all Democrats want to simplify the process of building long-distance power lines, which will lower electricity prices while ushering more renewables onto the grid. If America doesn't double its rate of transmission construction, then 80% of the IRA's carbon reductions will be squandered, according to Jesse Jenkins, a Princeton engineering professor. So a trade of sorts took shape. Democrats would open up NEPA, accomplishing a long-sought GOP goal in exchange for easing the path for new power lines. When Senator Joe Manchin proposed a permitting reform bill, that's essentially what it did. This is last year. The debt ceiling deal, though, inherits many of NEPA's reforms first contemplated in Manchin's bill. Today, the strictest type of NEPA review takes 4.5 years to complete, although some studies can take much longer. The deal will impose a 1-year deadline for most environmental review studies and a 2-year deadline for the strictest types. If an agency overruns those deadlines, then a project sponsor can sue the agency to get an accelerated decision. The deal also imposes new page limits on NEPA studies. Today, the most stringent studies can run more than 500 pages on average. Cap it at 150 because, sorry, I ain't reading all that, is essentially what the government is saying. To be sure, these reforms don't go as far as the GOP wanted, but really this is very interesting, I think, because it kind of throws it, in this bill, it kind of throws it a little bit to the market. Are they going to respond to this deregulation and do the right thing, do the thing that makes sense? Because, coal is, I was here from all these kind of, liberal-minded, kind of economic capitalists, who are, we don't have to do this kind of Green New Deal for climate change. The market is going to respond. Just give the market a chance. It's going to be all good. Well, here's the chance. This is going to be the area. It's going to be the place. If you want any kind of place, this is going to be the area where you are able to prove that when the government gives you an inch, you can take a mile and really jumpstart creation of green energy. All right, take a quick break. 35 seconds after that, we're talking Russia in a really crazy situation. They're getting drone strikes by Ukraine now.
It's the Spencer Walsh Radio Network.
Oh, see.
Going to buck in the latest drop. Got stopped by a lady cop. She got me thinking I could date a cop. Cause her uniform pants so tight. She read me down right. She put me in a pile. She cut apart the light. She said I have the right to remain silent. Now I gotta holler. Sounding like a siren.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. We are getting into our next story here today, talking a little bit about Russia and Ukraine. All right, so this is in the New York Times here. A day after a drone strike on Moscow, Kremlin officials jumped on the refusal of Ukrainian allies to denounce the attack as proof that Russia's real war was with the West. So this is really kind of a dangerous area, or dangerous situation that Ukraine has been setting. Obviously, there are really the West has been saying here, is as we kind of wait for, I guess, this big spring offensive in the East, we saw a Ukrainian drone strike on the Kremlin and a few other very kind of suspicious, and of course we talked about the Belgorod incursion of Ukrainian-led troops that we later found, people were trying to say, oh, false flag, false flag, false flag. We later found out these are kind of Ukrainian-associated troops going across the border into Russia. And in retaliation for that, Russia has now begun or restarted, frankly, bombing Kyiv again. So that is definitely not something that you want to see. Again, targeting civilians, doing all this kind of awful stuff. And Ukraine has, frankly, kind of is in a little bit of a kind of making an interesting response by drone striking kind of civilian targets outside of the Kremlin over the past few days, which obviously is this whole kind of stories about the West is not condemned, and they're essentially allowing Ukraine to do, because it's a really remarkable thing. As we send them F-16s to strike further inside Russia, Russia is saying that, you are allowing this. You are condemning this. We are not going to say, oh, it's all Ukraine's fault. They're the ones pushing this. No, we see what's going on. We know what the U.S. is trying to do. And, essentially saying that we don't like it. As awful as, they are people who should be losing this war. They are the people who are kind of causing, or not kind of, but they started it. They're causing a lot of the suffering here. And for a very long time, Ukraine had this moral high ground. This very weak country kind of being attacked by a bully, by a kind of autocratic, crazy bully, and the whole world rallies to stand up and help him and support him. And if they're going to start doing literally the exact same things Russia does, and especially if the West comes in and supports them either tacitly or with F-16s like the United States is doing right now, that will take away a lot of that moral high ground, which I think is going to be a big, big blow for them down the road. So this is obviously I'm going to watch here. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Russia would have preferred to hear from at least some words of condemnation from Western capitals. We will calmly and deliberately think about how to deal with this, he said. One of Ukraine's allies went so far as to endorse the drone attack. Britain's foreign secretary said on Tuesday that Kyiv had the right to, quote, project force beyond its borders. So, again, where does that leave Russia? So, again, how far do you want to go with this? What is the plan? This is really what the plan is. It seems to be what the plan is to keep pushing until you get to Moscow, frankly. Give them F-16s they are a proxy war force to get inside Moscow, because if they are not only refusing to condemn direct Ukrainian attacks beyond the border, which is a big line that they've crossed relatively recently, but also Joe Biden is sending them F-16s to attack further inside Russia with this bullshit, frankly, absolutely, I'm going to say the full word, because it's bullshit, kind of plan or, intimation that Vladimir Zelensky will not strike beyond Russian borders with the F-16s that Joe Biden's giving him. It's crazy. So this is something that's happening, and it's happening right now. It's happening quite fast. And I just do not know, how it's going to respond, because it could be a very, very scary situation, because, again, nuclear war, endless war, a lot of very, very bad, very, very scary possibilities here. And it does not seem like Joe Biden has really, frankly, a handle on them at all. Or at least he's going to keep pushing them until they either get out of control, they take Moscow, Ukraine does, or both. So it's going to be definitely something to watch very closely there. We will get to our last story next. My name is Spencer Walsh. This is the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, and if you're listening to one of our podcasts, whether it's Newsflash, Hidden History, The Spencer Walsh Show, or something else, ladies and gentlemen, we have one simple request of you. Please be sure to rate us, subscribe to us if you like us, and leave us a comment, because just like all of you, sometimes we need that feedback in our lives, good or bad. We want to hear what you have to say. So please do those steps. Make SWR and content better. And thank you so much for listening.
I
As fear subside, time will heal and seasons change, and love will bring you past the pain. Love is gonna lift you up. 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 Love is gonna lift you up.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome you back to the show. I apologize. I've been using this mute button, frankly, so much. I have kind of forgotten that I have it on. I was just apologizing for the sickness and the coughing and with the grass allergies and all that stuff that I have been dealing with, and so that's why I've been going so much to the mute button. Oh wait, I'm still using the mute button right now. So again, my apologies for that. We are back. Mics are all on. We are broadcasting to you, whether you be live or on demand. So thank you so much for listening. Really do appreciate a little bit of Bobby Womack, Julio Bashmore to kind of play us in, and really to celebrate a pretty big birthday. Henry Kissinger, round of applause. In 2002, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and his wife attended an elegant dinner party hosted by Barbara Walters. Other participants included Time editor Henry Grunwald, one-time ABC chair Thomas Murphy, and Peter Jennings, then anchor of ABC World News Tonight. At one point in the evening, a New York magazine recounted, Jennings addressed Kissinger and asked him, quote, "How does it feel to be a war criminal, Henry?" Kissinger did not respond, but Grunwald, who again is the one-time Time editor, part of a respectable kind of society. He said, this is a improper inquiry. This is in the intercept here from Jon Schwarz, and Kissinger did not respond. Barbara Walters, who, by the way, considers Henry Kissinger to be the most loyal friend, later said, "I tried to change the subject, but it was a very uncomfortable moment." And Kissinger's wife Nancy reacted very strongly and was hurt. And Schwartz here breaks this down really, really quite well. I'm surprised that, by the way, I'm pretty surprised that Peter Jennings has kind of a reputation for this empty suit type of newsman type of persona. I'm pretty surprised he would be someone who would come out and really call Henry Kissinger out on this. But, so the first is here that people at the top of American society absolutely love Henry Kissinger. They really view him as one of their own, one of the models, someone who just did American politics and American statecraft right. He's their beloved compatriot, and they are anxious to protect his delicate feelings. Second, really, was quite interesting, and that Jennings pretty sincerely believed that Kissinger was a war criminal, and that really he was willing to say this to Kissinger's face in private. But he did not have the courage to say that in public to his audience of tens of millions of Americans. Maybe you thought it was some kind of dinner party joke, good times had by all. But if he had said that on air, that would have been his last dinner party, frankly. Third, it's pretty clear Kissinger's famous rich pals will not exactly dispute that Kissinger is a monster. Not say, oh no. Rather, bringing it up as an embarrassing social faux pas, like say mentioning how everyone knows that your buddy is cheating on his wife who is sitting next to you. Why would you want to spoil the mood just when you're feeling all toasty at the Chamarton Grand Cru and having such a lovely time? Think of how Kissinger lives, ensconced in the silken embrace of wealth and power. And when you read Nick Turser's new reporting on his actions while in office, which is also in The Intercept, Kissinger, it turns out, was responsible for even more misery and death in the U.S., especially the bombing of Cambodia, than was already known. Which is really truly saying something, because he was already responsible for quite a lot of it. At the top of the pyramid, Kissinger enjoys endless banquets and oceans of acclamation. During the Nixon administration, Kissinger was beloved by Hollywood, often literally. He spoke at the 1996 funeral for a less prominent war criminal, Thomas Enders, and also an event attended by David Rockefeller, John Dee's grandson, president of the Council on Foreign Relations, and CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank, Paul Volcker, chair of the Federal Reserve, who said the standard of living of the average American has to decline to cut inflation, and Amalio Lacrosse de Fortabat, an Argentinian billionaire, and Venezuelan billionaire Gustavo Cisneros. At the height of the Iraq War, VP Dick Cheney reported that I can probably talk to Henry Kissinger more than I can talk to anyone else. He just comes by. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton referred to Kissinger as a friend, someone I relied on his counsel when I served as Secretary of State. Clinton then rearranged her schedule, giving an award to a designer, Oscar Lorenta, so both she and De Laurenta could attend Kissinger's 90th birthday back in 2014. He attended a Yankees game with noted humanitarian Samantha Power, and humanitarian, by the way, there is sarcastic. She was big into Obama's drone program, justifying that, laying the groundwork for that. Very much a classic example of a liberal hawk. And yeah, it was, again, later received an award from Kissinger, presented to her by Kissinger. He served on the board of the fraudulent company Theranos with Jim Mattis, the Marine Corps general who would go on to be Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, and George Shultz, who was the Secretary of State for Reagan. Kissinger joked that he didn't ask questions of Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos, because, quote, we were all afraid of her. Sure, that's what was going on. Who knows with that, honestly. This week, though, Washington Post granted Kissinger's son, David, president of Conan O'Brien's production company, by the way, space to tell us that to enjoy his 100th birthday, Kissinger is participating in a centennial celebration that will take him from New York to London and finally to his hometown of Fürth, Germany. One of the kickoff events was held at the Yale Club in Manhattan. It's like, bro, gotta get some tickets to see Henry Kissinger on tour. Wonderful stop in Cambodia. Jonathan Geyer on Twitter posed the question. The tables are set for celebration of Henry Kissinger at 100, hosted by Econ Club NY at the Yale Club. What would you ask Dr. Kissinger? Oh, boy. Then consider those down at the bottom of the pyramid. The Cambodians, Vietnamese, Laotians, Timorese, Pakistanis, Latin Americans, and many, many more, whose lives and bodies were torn to shreds by Kissinger. The many, many more here includes U.S. soldiers, who Kissinger referred to as dumb, stupid animals to be used. Here's what Trost writes about one such person when he met while reporting in Cambodia. Round-faced and just over 5 feet tall in plastic sandals, Miaz Lauren lost an older brother to a helicopter gunship attack and an uncle and cousin to artillery fire. For decades, one question haunted her. I still wonder why those aircraft attacked this area. Why did they drop bombs here? But, as Miaz Lauren will never ever get an answer, Trost describes an encounter with Kissinger when he was able to pass her inquiry along. When pressed about the substance of the question, the Cambodians that were bombed and killed, Kissinger became, no surprise, visibly angry. What are you trying to prove? He growled. And then, when I refused to give up, he cut me off. Play with it, he told me. Have a good time. How about that? That is someone who is totally on top of the world and knows it and knows that you, frankly, cannot do anything about it. I asked him to answer Miaz Lauren's question. Why did they drop bombs here? He refused. I'm not smart enough for you, Kissinger said sarcastically as he stomped off on his cane. I lack your intelligence and moral quality, he said, stalking off. Play with it, by the way, is a pretty bracing indeed to understand. The people who run this country find this kind of human being charming and delightful. When you think of Henry Kissinger, you should always have a shudder down your spine. Your body should stiffen as you've just heard the name of really the devil, because that's who he is. He is someone who is behind almost every major post-Cold War crime, especially the second half of the Cold War, that the United States has committed. He justifies it, he architects it, and he then, at 100, by the way, sits peacefully in the Econ Club, just completely, totally unbothered. Really is quite a testament to the state of American society, and also a testament to the fact that our show is now over. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back on Friday.